Have you ever wondered what characteristics define a good person? Someone who is kind, loving, and morally pure. To commit evil acts or perhaps become a monster. Consider a person you admire. Someone you can rely on. Becoming a person you barely recognize. But what if I told you that this isn't just a rare event, but a pattern of human behavior seen throughout history? Today, we are delving into one of the most interesting subjects and unsettling questions about human nature. Why do good people sometimes behave badly? When this video concludes, you'll learn about the shocking mechanisms that push ordinary people into the dark. More importantly, we will discover how to recognize and resist these influences by using the epiphany, being the most influential and powerful of them all. This journey engrosses us in the psychological assessments, historical events and philosophical reflections that make the thin line visible, knowing the difference between good and evil. This is not only another person's tale. We are forced to ask ourselves questions by the mirror. If I were them, how would I respond? Could I, too, be impacted by these elements? Stay with me because of what you're about to discover today can fundamentally change how you see the world. There is also a theory known as the Lucifer effect, popularized by the psychologist Philip Zimbardo. The infamous experiment at Stanford Prison was conducted by. What he revealed was very unsettling. The environment in which we find ourselves, the roles we assume and the authority we defer to, can trick even the most upright individuals into. Those who cause harm take it into account. Throughout history, there have been several instances of ordinary people who committed horrible crimes. The Nazi guards in the internment camp, the ethnic cleansing troops, perhaps even the viewers themselves, who said nothing when crimes were being committed. These folks weren't born evil. In many cases, they were common folks enmeshed in the events that expose the darkest sides of human nature. Why does this happen? The answer is in a combination of psychological and social elements that affect conduct. The power of the authority comes first. A psychologist, Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments from the 1960s, shown the remarkable lengths people will go to, even causing harm to others, when instructed by a superior. In his investigation, participants were told to use electricity to shock others. To another person who was an actor, remarkably, pretending to be in pain. Most volunteers continued to shock people, even when they believed they were in excruciating pain, just because they were told to. Now think about your own life. How often do we follow instructions without inquiring as to whether it comes from a superior, a leader, or even the norms of the community? In the case that an individual in a position of power asked you to compromise your morals, another essential component for overall well-being, symbolizes the concept of dehumanization. When we deprive someone of their humanity, referring to them as the enemy, inferior to or less than, it becomes easier to justify horrible actions. This tactic is commonly used in both routine conflicts and propaganda wars. It's easy to hurt someone when you no longer think of them as a person. Consider the terminology we already employ in discussions about politics and society. How often do we see labels applied to groups of people or assumptions? Think about how this reduces our capacity for empathy and relationship that promotes a us versus them mentality. Dehumanization is only one part of the issue, though. The function of social roles in group dynamics also have a significant role in Zimbardo. This was aptly demonstrated by the Stanford Prison experiment. Participants from the college were randomly paired to be the two guards, or prisoners kept in a mock prison. A couple days from now. The guards began mistreating people. And the prisoners showed signs of extreme stress. And submission, which was shocking, was the rate at which the participants no longer felt like themselves. They carry out the duties that have been delegated to them. This raises an important question. The extent to which the functions that society plays shape who we are makes us question if we truly have the freedom to act as individuals. Or are we unwittingly acting out parts based on the systems in our surroundings? These are powerful forces. Dehumanization and group dynamics are not theoretical. They participate in our daily operations, influencing the way we think, how we act and perceive people we meet at work. Social media use in homes and schools. Comprehending these factors is the first stage of resistance to them. However, what about the tipping point? The exact moment when a good person crosses the boundary. Often, that moment is subtle. First, small compromises are made. Choosing to keep quiet while injustice occurs. A promise to follow along just this once. Over time, these small choices pile up, putting a shine on things that could lead to grave moral failure. Give it some thought. Own. Did you ever make a choice that didn't align with your values? Because it seems easier or safer. What consequences resulted? As we move forward, we'll examine how to spot these situations before the situation becomes unmanageable. More importantly, we'll learn how to become more resilient when confronted with these psychological aspects. But first, let's tackle a deeper question. Are some people immune to the Lucifer effect? Or is it a danger to everyone? Pay attention to what comes next. We'll go against all you believe. You know who you are. Taking human nature into account, let's now confront the query that a lot of people frequently ask themselves. Are some people really immune to the Lucifer effect? Even though it is uncomfortable, the response is that none of us is totally immune. Psychologists have been debating the role of personality for a long time in preventing corruption and moral decline. However, some traits, such as a strong ability to empathize, self-knowledge, and moral strength could act as protections. The truth is that, under the proper or perhaps improper conditions, anyone could be impacted by these variables. Think about it this way. Every one of us has the capacity for both great good and unspeakable harm. In literature, this dichotomy is common. Carl Jung's philosophical and religious beliefs, the well-known Swiss psychiatrist, referred to this as our mental shadows. The darker, more often repressed sides of ourselves that we are reluctant to acknowledge. Jung believed that understanding oneself completely, we must confront this melancholy and integrate it into our mental awareness. Have you ever had an angry or jealous outburst? So bad that even you were surprised. Have you said or done anything before, in the middle of the situation, something you later deeply regretted? These are clues about the activity of the shadow. Ignoring this shadow could cause it to spread and show up in ways that align with Lucifer's influence. But here's where the optimism lies. Awareness is our best defense. By being conscious of the psychology mechanisms that lead to moral collapse, we gain the capacity to resist them. Let's examine it more closely into how these factors operate in the real world, in addition to how we can fight them. One of the most harmful techniques is what experts in psychology call this concept of moral disengagement. The psychologist Albert Bandura introduced demonstrates how people rationalize risky action to avoid feeling guilty or regretful. For example, someone might convince themselves that it's what everyone else is doing, or that the goals justify the methods. These explanations create a psychological distance between the individual and their actions, facilitating the defense of wrongdoing. Consider how this shows up in actual circumstances. A student may cheat on an exam, making the case that it will only occur once. A manager may deal with employees unfairly, believing it's necessary to accomplish company goals. In these circumstances, moral disengagement permits people acting against their moral convictions. The solution to this is what some psychiatrists refer to as moral consciousness. This means evaluating our actions critically and their consequences, even if they are unpleasant. I treasure you. Am I protecting something that I know deep down that this is wrong? Another successful tactic is the cultivation of empathy. Empathy is a counterpoint to dehumanization. When we recognize that other people are complex, empathetic individuals with goals. When someone has dreams and fears, it is more harder to harm them. Because of this, narrative, genuine human connection and art are vital. They remind us that we are human and take down the barriers that stand between us. But what about society as a whole? How do we handle the larger systems and procedures that continue to cause harm? Can enable the Lucifer effect. Generally speaking, this is the role of the leadership role. And collective responsibility becomes crucial. Experience has taught us that charismatic leaders may elevate or corrupt entire societies, and Adolf Hitler, for example, used fear and bigotry to justify atrocities. But leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., utilizing their influence to promote positive change against injustice. This brings us to an important question. Who do we choose to follow as our leader? Furthermore, to what extent do we influence others? Even if we don't occupy conventionally powerful roles, we all have influence within our families, communities, and workplaces. The question is, if we use that ability to boost empathy and fairness, or to keep creating harm and discord. Think about your own life for a moment. Who do you look up to as role models? Which values do they adhere to? And equally important, what kind of model do you have in mind? For those who think highly of you, examining different forces of authority, moral disengagement, dehumanization, and leadership. It is clear that virtue and evil are at odds. Is not just found outside. Every one of us often fights this internal conflict. But this is the reality of empowerment. Situations involving justice may deceive. They can also lead us to incredible honesty, courage, and generosity. Comparable mechanisms that create demons can also yield heroes. So, how can we ensure that we stay on the correct course? How can we build the strength to resist the allure of the Lucifer effect? When the time comes, the answers will be there for you. In the part that follows, we'll disclose practical techniques for determining and resisting the forces that lead to moral failure. These strategies have been studied by psychologists, both ordinary people and spiritual leaders. They have faced extraordinary challenges. And remember that the final insight we'll look at is the most groundbreaking of all. A realization that could change not only your opinion of other individuals, but also how you see yourself. Must resist the forces that can deceive us. First, we must understand that awareness alone is not enough. While admitting the psychological factors behind the Lucifer effect is a necessary step, we need realistic strategies to counteract their effects. Let's look into these strategies. Beginning with the notion of moral courage. Moral bravery is the ability to act in a moral manner, and stand up for what's right. In spite of resistance, anxiety, or personal loss. It serves as the impetus for speaking out against injustice. To protect the vulnerable. Or to admit a mistake. When would it be more practical to say nothing? But moral courage is not something we are born with. We cultivate it via deliberate practice. And reflection. Think about historical figures like Rosa Parks. Who won't get out of her bus seat? Starting the fight for civil rights. Alternatively, consider whistleblowers. Who expose corruption and misconduct. Often at a significant personal cost. These folks were easily frightened. However, they made the decision to take action. Therefore, how can we develop moral courage in our own lives? Start by identifying your core beliefs. The principles that you hold most dear. These might include honesty and compassion. Accountability or fairness. Remember times when you had to make moral choices. Did your behavior align with these principles? Or did you relinquish them? Visualization is a helpful technique. Yourself in challenging circumstances. How would you react if you witnessed bullying at work? What would you do? If forced to follow an unethical directive. By visualizing these situations and rehearsing your response, you become more capable of taking decisive action. When the moment arrives, another important strategy is to build strong social connections with others who share similar interests. Being surrounded by helpful individuals and individuals with high moral standards can act as a barrier to prevent negative consequences. These relationships cultivate a sense of accountability and assistance, making it easier to resist pressure to conform. And strength, but what occurs when we come across systems or environments that seem to be designed to erode our morals? This is where the concept of situational awareness is essential. Being situationally aware means recognizing the intricate relationships and elements that affect behavior. For example, follow the group's rules. What is considered suitable or expected in a certain situation? If you notice patterns of exclusion, I treasure you. Think about whether this is actually true. Or have I simply accepted it because everyone else has? Additionally, consider how minor details can have a significant impact. We often feel powerless when confronted with systemic issues. But even small rebellion can make a difference. Think about the rippling effect. How someone chooses to act honorably can inspire others to do the same. For example, at work. Speaking out against unethical behavior might seem risky, but it can encourage others to voice their concerns. Similarly, in a comparable way, making the decision to be kind and understanding in daily interactions may be against the civilization that dehumanizes, that regularly pollutes society. Furthermore, let's talk on the importance of self-reflection. The philosopher Socrates famously said, "Without investigation, life is not worth living." We can identify our biases through self-reflection. Acknowledge our mistakes and grow from them. It isn't about being perfect. Although regarding improvements in innovations, a little more aware each day. Develop the habit of regularly asking oneself questions. Like the motivation behind my actions today. Did I treat others with respect and empathy? Did I ever say nothing at all when I should have spoken louder? Taking into account these questions, you work on being more deliberate in your actions. And truthfulness, but what about the most crucial question? Will the Lucifer effect ever be completely eradicated? While the reaction of every individual may differ. And social components. The key is to foster what psychologists find. Philip Zimbardo asserts that a heroic imagination. The mindset that is referred to as heroic imagination is one that Enables ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. When confronted with moral quandaries, it is the belief that you can affect. Since heroic actions are not reserved for the exceptional, yet is accessible to anyone. To cultivate this mindset, first look for opportunities to practice minimal. A few instances of heroic actions are defending a person who is receiving unfair treatment, offering to help people in need, or simply choosing empathy over indifference. In the discussions you have every day, studying also has advantages. The lives of those who have exhibited courage, from historical figures to activists today, their stories teach us that kindness and courage are now within our reach. Maybe you're wondering, what is the most powerful insight? What an epiphany might genuinely alter how we see ourselves in the world? The remedy lies in understanding the profound interconnectedness of all individuals. The difference between right and wrong doesn't cross social boundaries or nations, it is a sentiment shared by all people. As Alexander Solzhenitsyn previously wrote, the conflict between goodness and evil passes through the heart of every individual. This realization is humble and empowering. It reminds us that we are all capable of damage and recuperation, but it also gives us the autonomy to choose for ourselves. There is a new opportunity every second to act morally in order to resist the power of darkness. Aspire to contribute to the development of a caring society. And justice are still with me from the previous part. We'll take a closer look at these ideas. Is relevant to your private life. We'll work together to identify practical strategies to not only resist the Lucifer effect but to become a constructive impact in a world that desperately needs it. Now, the mechanisms of psychology have been identified that has the ability to influence good people to follow bad authorities. Disengagement from morals. The effects of dehumanization and group dynamics. We have examined how consciousness, moral courage, empathy, and moral courage, and reflection serve as defenses against these demands. Now let's focus on what you are now capable of doing to develop into something more than simply resilient, but a ray of optimism under trying circumstances. Taking responsibility for your effect is the first step. No matter how little or inconsequential your role may seem, you can affect the environment around you. In every interaction you engage in, the norms and values that guide others. Are you fostering a compassionate culture, responsibility and fairness? Or are you unwittingly allowing harmful practices to persist? Consider someone's story. Who changed history's course by actions that appear to be inconsequential? Oskar Schindler, a German entrepreneur. During the Second World War. First motivated by the profit, Schindler used his riches to save the lives of almost 1,000 individuals. Jews during the Holocaust. This story illustrates how one individual may, and even in one of the darkest eras of history, can make a big difference. There is no need for extraordinary circumstances. Ought to follow this model. A smart place to start is in your community, at work or even inside your household. Speak up when you see injustice. Help someone who is experiencing loneliness. Break stereotypes and assumptions that lead to conflict. When magnified, these minor behaviors have the power to alter more than just one person's life, but entire communities. Another important step is to educate oneself and others. Knowing is one of the most effective tools for countering manipulation. Examine the past in relation to moral decline. Psychology and philosophy aid in improving your understanding of how and why decisions are made by individuals. Share this information with others. not to preach or lecture, but to initiate crucial conversations that promote self-reflection and growth. For example, have you ever considered how much the stories we read affect the way we think? Films, books, and because our perceptions of right and wrong are regularly influenced by the media. Both right and wrong. By seeking for narratives that challenge your assumptions and broaden your perspective, you construct a more intricate and a compassionate view of the world. Let's also talk about resilience. Under duress. When you stand up for what is right, there are risks. Social exclusion. Consequences for the workplace or even a personal loss. Resilience is crucial for this reason. Fearlessness and resilience are not the same thing. It shows maintaining conduct that is in line with your values, despite the fear. In order to boost resilience, focus on mental health promoting activities and psychological well-being. Mindfulness meditation may be a part of these. Maintaining a journal, or seeking guidance from close friends and mentors. Accept the people in your immediate vicinity as a community who support and inspire you. The development of resilience requires multiple individuals. It thrives when it is linked to other individuals. But what happens if we don't succeed? Since we will inevitably, there will be moments when fear. Else we give in to the strain. When we do the activities that we later regret. At this point, the concept of self-forgiveness becomes essential. Self-forgiveness does not entail endorsing bad behavior, but about owning up to your mistakes, taking responsibility and making a commitment to get better. It involves acknowledging that failure is a part of the state of humanity and that evolution often comes from acknowledging our shortcomings. Think for a moment. Have you ever let your personal values get in the way of your actions? In what way did you respond to that failure? Did you learn from it, or did you let it define who you are? The ability to forgive oneself as well as others is one of the most efficient tools for breaking the harmful cycles preserved by the Lucifer effect. It allows you to move forward with clarity and direction, rather than being troubled by resentment or remorse. Finally, let's return to the most significant insight of all. Interconnectedness of humans. Once we recognize that the difference between right and wrong goes through the heart of every individual, we begin to recognize people and ourselves with greater compassion. Destructive behavior is not justified by this knowledge. However, it does allow us to see the world with empathy, with a commitment to healing, rather than making a judgment. Think about the effects of what you do. Every choice you make, no matter how small, causes a stir throughout the world. Will your actions lead to harm and conflict? Or will they bring people together and inspire hope? Imagine a society in which everyone takes responsibility for their actions, for our own choices, where we fight against the forces that dehumanize and divide, and where we strive to create environments that encourage goodwill and moral integrity. This objective is not unachievable. One decision at a time, we can build it. As our journey comes to an end, I'll give you one final assignment. Reflect on what you have learned today. After that, think about how you might apply it to your own life. How will you recognize and oppose the things that cause you to deviate from your values? How are you going to change the world where goodness subdues evil? The solutions to these questions are challenging. They are worth pursuing, though, because, in the end, the tension between good and evil is not fought on distant battlefields, in abstract ideas or concepts. Each of us fights against it every day. Therefore, the next time you must make a moral choice, remember that you are capable of making a choice. You have the ability to resist, and you are capable of becoming a constructive influence. in a world that desperately needs it. Is the challenge something you can manage? Thank you for looking.